How should you move your hips when you fold your trunk toward your legs to get the best stretch possible? This is what I'll be talking about in this video. Alright, so the topic is this. When we fold our body toward our legs, we essentially stretch the whole lower body, since we're stretching our lower back, our glutes, our hamstrings, our adductors, and depending on the width of our legs, we are going to stretch the adductors more or less, depending on how we spread the legs apart. Okay, so the less we spread the legs, this is a pike position, the less we stretch our adductors, because the legs are closed basically, and the more we spread our legs, the more we involve the adductors in the stretch. When you fold your trunk toward your legs, you got two back postures you can use. A rounded back, which means that you're gonna round your back and reach for your legs with your torso, but in this way you're not using the flexibility coming from your lower body, but rather you're using your upper body flexibility, because your spine is able to flex, and this gives you the sensation of getting into the stretch, but actually what you're doing is you're curving your spine. You're not really straightening through the hips and getting into the best stretch possible. Vice versa, the correct technique if you want to stretch your lower body is trying not to involve the spine in the stretch, which means you don't want to excessively curve your spine, but rather keep the stretch focused on your hip joint instead. So the area you should focus on is your hip joint, okay? So it's not about the technique here, I'm talking about the area you do want to focus on, which is your hip joint, to get the best stretch and results possible. When you fold your trunk toward your legs, if you want to stretch correctly and get the best stretch possible, you should care about your hips, not about your trunk, not about your legs. Your legs are straight, your trunk straight. Care about your hip joint. Here is where the stretch happens, and here is where you should pay really close attention. Now, it doesn't matter if you curve your back or you keep your trunk straight, is what happens inside of your hip that really changes the stretch. You got two postures, posterior pelvic tilt and anterior pelvic tilt. Posterior pelvic tilt is your enemy. It's the posture you do want to avoid. You are curving your lower back, you are sitting down on your glutes, and from here, if you try to bring your trunk toward your legs, you're gonna get stuck and you're gonna use your spine flexibility only, almost. This posture of posterior pelvic tilt is typical of those who have stiff hamstrings and adductors, and if these muscles are really stiff, it's gonna be impossible for you to change this kind of posture here, okay? So this one is the posture you do want to avoid, but it's really difficult to avoid if you're stiff, and for that you gotta stretch. Anterior pelvic tilt instead is your friend, and it's the posture you do want to use, because here you sit down not on your glutes but on your hip bones. So you roll your pelvis and you straighten through your lower back. In this way, by keeping your hips in this kind of posture, you're gonna better be able to stabilize your trunk, straighten your trunk, and fold your trunk toward your legs through the hip joint, because the hip joint in this way can fold down. In the other posture, posterior pelvic tilt, the hip joint is stuck. You can't really fold it maximally because your pelvis is stuck onto the floor and you can't move it properly. By arching your lower back, rolling your pelvis into anterior pelvic tilt, then you're gonna be able to fold through the hip joint correctly, stretching the muscles involved in a forward bending motion. Now, the problem is that it all sounds fantastic in theory. Okay, I just gotta do this and I'm gonna be able to fold my body down, but it's not that simple, because you do need flexibility if you want to move in this way. So I'm gonna guide you through some steps you can follow if you want to be able to move your pelvis correctly and fold your body toward your legs using your hip joint. All right, follow me for a second here with my assistant Wendy. Say hello, okay? So when you fold your trunk toward your legs, you move your hip into a position called flexion. So you do something like this. Now, this position here requires hamstrings, adductors, and glutes flexibility. These are the most important muscles there. These muscles can limit your hip movement, but not only that, because your hip, it's not just about your leg, it's also about your pelvis, okay? And your hamstrings, your adductors, and your glutes connect to the pelvis as well. So, if they're stiff, they're not only gonna limit your leg movement, but also your pelvic movement. So if you're stuck, if you can't move your pelvis properly, that's because your hamstrings, your adductors, and your glutes may be stiff. That's why you want to work on their flexibility specifically. Once all these structures, the adductors, the hamstrings, and the glutes are properly flexible, then you're gonna better be able not only to move your leg, but also to move your pelvis into posterior or anterior tilt, because these muscles are flexible enough to let it move. So there is this thing we have to do, which is getting more flexible. And how can we do it? You know, hamstrings, adductors, and glutes. Now, there are plenty of exercises, okay? So I'm not here just to teach you 100 of exercises, really, literally, you can do for these muscles. But one exercise I like, one exercise you should work on is the standing pancake with a weight, okay? Now, I'm suggesting you this exercise for a simple reason. First, you are standing, you're not sitting down on the floor. On the floor, you got the floor, which can limit your hip movements, okay? So you're not gonna be able to properly move your hip if you're not flexible enough. In a standing position, you can do that because you're not sitting on something, you're just standing up. So you can move your hips properly. Second, you're gonna involve your adductors, your hamstrings, and your glutes with one single exercise, which is a time saver, and also by using a weight, you're gonna feel the stretch properly. This is quite simple to do. You stand up on a couple of yoga blocks, or if you have some boxes, some chairs, something like that, you can also stand on higher supports, okay? So one foot, one support, one foot on the other. Now it goes like this, really simple. You grab the weight and you have three main stretching methodologies. The first one, the easiest one, you grab the weight and you let the weight pull you down as much as possible. Now, since in a forward fold, as we have seen, the major kind of attention has to be put on straightening through the lower back and getting into anterior pelvic tilt. Don't let the weight pull you down, but you just relax there. Try to actively straighten through your lower back and move your pelvis into anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so stick your bum out, straighten your lower back, and let the weight intensify the stretch like this. Second stretching methodology you can use is a dynamic stretch. So rather than staying with your legs straight at all times, you want to bend your legs a bit, straighten through your lower back, and then you straighten your knees and get closer to the floor with your body. As you do so, one piece of advice I can give you is this. Don't fold your trunk toward your legs only. Try to push your head toward the floor as much as possible. This is gonna help you straighten through your lower back. And now to the third and last stretching methodology you do want to use here, which is driving your body a little bit more toward one side. So if, for example, you feel that your right leg is stiffer than your left one, you may want to shift your trunk a little bit more toward this leg. In this way, you're gonna be able to stretch one leg more than the other, always keeping in mind that you do want to straighten through the lower back and anterior pelvic tilt as much as possible. So you do want to emphasize this kind of anterior tilt posture in order to increase your forward fold range of motion and stretch the muscles involved in this stretch. Now that your muscles are properly flexible, it's time for you to understand how to correctly move your hips. One thing is thinking about it. Another thing is doing it. It's not that simple, okay? So one exercise you can use to figure that out is this. You do want to sit down maybe on 1, 2, or 3 yoga blocks depending on your level, okay? The higher, the easier, the lower, the harder, okay? So choose your height. From here, What you want to do, you start by getting into the wrong posture, our enemy, the posterior pelvic tilt. Then from here, you can use your hands for assistance to start, okay? So hands on the floor, posterior tilt. Now you try to move your hips correctly into anterior tilt. Now, I can't explain to you the difference it makes. You're really gonna feel something changing inside of your muscles, like something is, oh, now it's pulling, now it's not pulling, now it's pulling, now it's not pulling. You can pull with your hands, pushing with your fingers on the floor in order to correctly move your hips. So you go posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt. It's a roll. Making you use the yoga block under your hips, because in this way you're gonna really feel your pelvis, your pelvic floor rolling on something, okay? So here I'm standing at the edge of the yoga block. Then as I go into the anterior tilt, I can really feel my pelvis rolling onto the yoga block and getting into another position, which is the anterior tilt, okay? So you want to feel that your pelvic floor is making something like a roll, okay? Starting at the edge and getting to the other edge with the front part of the pelvis touching down, okay? So posterior tilt and anterior tilt. This is really important. Once you got it on the yoga block, you start doing the same. You can do the same on the floor. It's gonna be the same, exactly the same, okay? So, posterior pelvic tilt, curved lower back, sitting on the glutes. Anterior pelvic tilt, roll and touch, okay? Lower back straight. As you do this, you can use your hands for assistance. As you get better, you can also do the same without your hands until you properly master this kind of movement here. This is not only a movement, this is a stretch, okay? So you want to treat it like a proper stretch. Once you got it correctly, then every time you want to get into a forward folding motion, you first get into your anterior tilt and then you go down. Now you got the perfect stretch for your hips and lower body. So we have seen how to increase your forward folding motions. First, you gotta stretch to get your muscles properly flexible to get into the correct hip posture, which is anterior pelvic tilt. Then, as your muscles are flexible enough, you do want to think about getting it right posture-wise. If your muscles are not flexible enough, working on your posture doesn't make any sense because you can't get the proper sensation. So, get flexible first, step number one. Work on your posture second, step number two. I hope that this approach will lead you to better flexibility results and to better forward folds. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions or doubts for me. I do read all the comments and I would be more than happy to have a chat with you. Remember that if you want to increase your flexibility, you can download my Flexibility Guide app, where you're gonna find an entire stretching video course and more than 50 programs to follow to take your flexibility, handstands, bodyweight training to the next level. You can check it out following the link in the description down below. With that said, thank you so much for staying with me today. Have a nice stretch and see you in the next video.
I traveled all the way to Japan in this place of silence and peace to find out the secrets of flexibility training. I'm in this temple right now because here is where I believe it's hidden, the secret I'm looking for. You gotta be somewhere around here. What? A book? Nani? Honwa? Secret desu ka? Amazon de kaimasu ka? Oh, so ka. Arigatou gozaimasu. Stretching Modern Flexibility Methods is the complete playbook to master your flexibility, and you can check it out on Amazon right now. Huh? It works! It works!